Next speaker today is Kathy Kleiman. She was a pioneering attorney, programmer, and data security auditor. She's also a historian of the ENIAC Programmers. She co-founded ICANN's Noncommercial Users Constituency in 1998. As an attorney, she founded one of the first internet law practices. After attending ENIAC's 40th anniversary and meeting the ENIAC programmers, Kleiman felt compelled to tell the untold story of the 6 women who programmed the ENIAC, the first all-electric programmable computer. Thus, she founded the ENIAC Programmers Project. She'll be showing part of the documentary created by these women.
Thank you, Jeff.
Everyone give a good hand applause to Kathy Kleiman.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's great to be here and to share this story. When I was taking computer science, there was virtually no information about who created either the computers or the programming languages. I think I heard a little bit about Ritchie in my C course and a little bit about McCarthy, only because he was so, he was such a personality that there were some stories about him in my Lisp and Intro AI class. But that was about it. It was as if these computers had been created, full blown. And so that's why I love being here. Jeff, what you've created here in the Vintage Computer Festivals and the ability, the wonder of telling these stories that, because computing and programming and systems and languages were all created by people, and they all have stories behind them. So telling these stories brings it to life, and I hope we can take this material from here into the STEM programs, into the classrooms, so that students have more sense. I mean, the mistakes are much more, it's almost more fun, right, than the successes, and they're so important to know. But when I was in computing, there were 2 women that they talked about, Ada Lovelace and then Captain, later Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. And they weren't real approachable to me. And it was only one woman a century, one woman in the 19th century, one woman in the 20th century. And I took a history course and I went looking for, were there other women in computing? And I don't know, can you see the picture? Okay, so I found these pictures of ENIAC, as Jeff told us, the first general purpose, programmable, all electronic computer. And 8 feet tall, 80 feet long, and there is a marvelous 3D replication of it by Professor Brian Stewart. Could you raise your hand? In the exhibit hall. And please go see it. But these pictures, there were lots of pictures taken. ENIAC was a secret World War II project of the US Army, a lot like Bletchley Park for the UK. Secret US Army project, but unlike the UK project, they didn't destroy it at the end of World War II, and they did not swear everyone to secrecy for 50 years, under penalty of treason. That's why we didn't hear that story in the UK for so long. They made it public. February 15th, 1946, the ENIAC goes public to a special audience of science and technology communities. It's about 6 months after the war. Should I be closer? Good. And a lot of pictures were taken. These pictures show up in newspapers across the country on February 15th, February 16th. And some of them have men in them, some of them have men and women, some of them have women. Some of the men, not all of them, but some of the men are in the captions, and some of them aren't. None of the women are in the captions. And when I found this, and other pictures like it, you'll see them in the documentary, I went to my professor, who sent me to some computer historians who told me they were models. I wanted to know. And I don't know, they just didn't look like models to me. And I went out searching for them. And I warn undergraduates now, be careful what pictures you pick up when you're an undergraduate. You may be working on them years later. And this is Jean Jennings Bardick. She was Jean Jennings at the time, and Fran Bilas, later Spence. And they were 2 of the original 6 programmers of the ENIAC. I was able to record the oral histories, extensive oral histories with 4 of the original 6. And we made this documentary short. It's a 20-minute production that we'll share with you, that premiered at the Seattle International Film Festival in 2014, to share their stories and mostly let them tell you their stories. They've all passed away now, but it makes me very happy every time I see them back on the screen telling the stories. And I share with you their regret that they're telling the stories. They're in their 70s when they're telling these stories. I think one's in her 80s, and they're telling stories about what they did in their early 20s. Aren't they incredible? And isn't it wonderful to hear the story from them? So what we're going to do now is two parts, because we've got how much more time? About 50 minutes?
Yeah, about 45 minutes.
45 minutes. So first, I'm going to take some questions and about the ENIAC programmers, about the documentary, and then a few more people are going to come join us, and we're going to sit in front of the stage and hopefully have a dialogue about women in computing, about early computing, anything you want to talk about. But I'm going to bring up some experts to help me with that, and we can even talk about internet governance if you want to, but you probably don't. But first, some questions about the ENIAC, and there may be questions online as well about the ENIAC programmers, and some of them I may refer to Professor Brian Stewart, who is his papers on simulating the ENIAC, programming the ENIAC, and debugging the ENIAC. Brian, could you wave again? You're just really the technical expert here. He's done more on programming the ENIAC than anyone. Okay, over to you, Jeff.
Sorry about that. Anybody have any questions? I'll come to you so you can ask their question so I can hear it. Anybody have any questions right now at the moment? Yes?
How did they go from basically being mathematicians and seeing a schematic of something that's never existed and making that jump into doing it?
Making that jump to what? I didn't
Into
hear.
doing it.
They're smart? That was someone else. I asked them that, and Kay McNulty, who became Kay McNulty Mockley, because she'll marry John Mockley after the war. She had a really nice response. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here just a little bit. She said, it was the war. Everybody did out of the ordinary things. This is what we were asked to do, and we did it. She was very modest. Jean and Betty were a little more direct. They're like, it was hard. And my book, which is coming out this summer, July 26th, called Proving Ground, because they're working for the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in rural Maryland at the time, even though the project is located in Philadelphia at the Moore School. So the book is Proving Ground, and it tells the story in even more detail, really, of how they broke down the problem and how they broke down the ENIAC, which, while it had 40 unique units, they're subdivided. So there were 20 accumulators, which could add, subtract, and store, temporary storage. So it talks about how they break it down, how they kind of go off in pairs to learn the units of ENIAC, also the direct programming method of ENIAC, and they come back to teach each other, the six. So it kind of lays out that whole story as they told it to me. But it's a great question, and that's a question I had for a long time. Thank you.
All right, hold on. We got another question.
Yes, because so much is made about the limited reliability of vacuum tubes, and they were learning to program the system for the problem they were given to solve, were they also writing little programs for debugging, not their own code, but finding, isolation down to individual units? Oh, this is the accumulator that's failed, or this is where there's a hardware problem. Did they create some of their own tools as well?
They learned how to use tools that were there. So direct programming meant that you no, it's a great question. The answer is yes, but not in the way you're thinking, because of the unusual method of this direct interface with ENIAC. So if you wanted a number to go from the accumulator 1's temporary storage, to the multiplier for the next calculation, you literally ran that number through what was called a digit tray, or you could use a digit wire, but normally use trays that ran it, along the ENIAC's length, and took it over. These were horizontal trays, big, long horizontal trays. So first, the genius of J. Presper Eckert, who was 24 years old and 25 years old when he's doing most of his work. So Dr. John Mockley was the visionary of this general purpose programmable computer concept. But J. Presper Eckert, 23 years old when he met him, and 24 years old when they got the contract from the Army, was the one who figured out that vacuum tubes didn't have to be used the way we had used them in radios. They didn't have to be used for amplification, sometimes you put a lot of power through them. They could be run. He needed them, and John needed them for on and off. And so you could run them at much lower powers. And he also realized that there was a reliability problem. So instead of just putting vacuum tubes into the ENIAC, he had burn-in racks. And he'd test them first. And if they went through, if they went through his tests, then he'd put them in. So by the time they get to ENIAC, the reliability of these vacuum tubes is higher than what, a lot of people at the time said, it'll never work. 18,000 vacuum tubes will never work for more than a few seconds. That was wrong. It did work for a long time. Nonetheless, vacuum tubes did blow out. And so to answer your question, as the women were working through, and you really have to go to Professor Stewart's booth to see this, they had a little remote-controlled device. And they had also bench tested. Brilliant, right? They bench tested the program. And so they had the result of the test program at every stage that had been hand calculated using that desktop calculator, the thing that was going click, click, click in the movie and sits in my living room. And you can buy them on eBay, the Monroes and the Marchands from the 1940s. And we were mostly using Monroes and Marchands, but there were Friedens as well, of course, and the big three. Let's see these. Okay, so when you get to the program, as the women figured out a technique for debugging. So initially, you're just trying to debug the logic of your program, right? Did you, miswire something? Should it have gone from, accumulator 1 to the square root divider instead of the multiplier? Is it the wrong cable going into the wrong hole, the wrong place? So they go through, they've got this all written out, and in fact, if you want to see their spreadsheet, it's and their flow chart, it's over there. I've got a sample, not of the differential calculus equation for the ballistics trajectory, that was top secret, but this is of a later program, a slightly later program, using the same technique, where you see the columns are the accumulators and the square root divider and the multiplier, and it shows you in their code how the data and the program pulse move from one unit to another. And if you want to know about program pulses, go ahead and ask me. But so for debugging, there was a tool, and you could move one add time, or you could move the program forward one add time at a time. And you could check, each accumulator had a grid of tiny lights at the top, 10 by 10, that showed you the number that was in the accumulator. So while the accumulator was doing its addition and subtraction or its initial storage, it would flash, but then it went to steady state, and you could tell what the number was, so you could check it off your bench test. And what was really interesting was, as the program went on, the women will have debugged a section, and they'll come in the next day in that same section that they had just, gone through and checked, and it all worked right, and it didn't work. So what's the problem? Well, it turns out, even though it was top secret, certain professors were going in to show their friends this cool new thing, and they were playing with the switches. What? So they learned to initially go in and just check everything that was at arm level and, just do a quick check. Had things been changed and reset it. Okay, so that was one way to find it. But the other way was literally a vacuum tube was blown. And if a vacuum tube was blown, it didn't work. Didn't work when it got to that unit. So debugging, figuring out which of 18,000 vacuum tubes was a hard task, and getting the attention of the engineers, these wonderful, wonderful young hardware engineers, who were still testing their units. Each one had kind of taken over whether they were doing the accumulator, the cycling unit, which was the program pulse unit. And so they're still testing, and so trying to get their attention. How do you find the 18,000 vacuum tubes? And finally, they realized that they should really debug it themselves. And so they go through one add time at another, using this, again, incredible remote control device that Professor Stewart has recreated, and it's amazing to see. And they would get to a point in the program where, and Jean loved telling this story, they'd get to a point in the program that had worked the day before and now had an incorrect result. And that was the unit that had the blown vacuum tube. And then they could get the attention of the engineers because they had debugged it, and they could get that vacuum tube swapped out. It was much faster and much easier. And she said initially the engineers didn't pay much attention to us because they had their own work. And then they realized we were saving them time. And so then they started, and they all became a team. That debugging process helped make them a team. So thank you for asking. It was kind of an odd debugging process, but that's how they did it. Are there other questions in the back, or do we go here?
Another question?
So these women had math degrees. What did they expect their careers to have been had they not done this?
Can I rephrase that as what they would have expected their careers to be had the war not broken out? Okay, so before World War II, and maybe a little afterwards, but certainly when I went to, I spent a lot of time in the bowels of the Library of Congress on this because I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I went through the microfiche of 1940s newspapers, and there were separate men's help wanted sections and women help wanted sections, and all the jobs for accountants and actuaries were on the male help wanted section, not on the women's help wanted section. So before the war, the big career that was open to women with math degrees was math teacher. And lots of women did it and were very important. And these women had female math teachers who were teaching them and inspired them in high school and college, and men too. So, but when the war broke out, the story that I learned writing the book was really that the home front opened up. We know that women were invited into the factories and farms, right? That's the home front story we know. What I didn't know was the whole science and technology was just as, was having exactly the same problems as the factory and farm, that they needed people too. The people who were doing not the military side, but certainly the civilian side of science and technology, who we desperately needed, were recruiting women. They were going after. There were half-page ads in the paper, as well as articles saying, if you have science, if you have technology, if you have math backgrounds, please apply because we need you. So had the war not broken out, their opportunities in mathematics would have been very limited. With the war breaking out, if they had not seen the ads from Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Army saying women math majors wanted, I don't know what they would have done, but my guess is they would have found another one of these science and tech jobs that were open. And certainly, Code Girls tells the story of women working on encryption during World War II. A lot of that was going on in Arlington, Virginia, as well as the women, of course, for the UK in Bletchley Park. And so, it is completely possible. They could have gone to Arlington as cryptographers. And that's a great story. And I remember seeing those pictures at one of the museums in CIA or NSA museums just outside of DC. And I remember looking and seeing that there were women in the pictures, in the black and white pictures from World War II, and they weren't in the captions. And I'm like, I'm not telling that story. But someone else did, Liza Mundy, and it is Code Girls, and it's a wonderful story. So thank you for raising that. And of course, Hidden Figures, also telling the story of the women mathematicians who worked at NASA. Incredible.
Okay, we have another question.
I actually just wanted to reference that movie, and I wanted to ask you, with movies like yours, like Hidden Figures, Code Girls, others, have you seen a difference in how the institutions that tell these stories have changed? Basically the narrative, where it's not sort of an exception and a discovery and it's becoming a part. Has that actually happened?
I didn't hear the last sentence. It's not necessarily
I'm curious whether you've seen a change in how, in education and in the curriculum of that history, has that story started to be told more of as a regular part of history rather than an exception that needs to be uncovered, like you've done in your movie?
That's a good question. And the answer is I don't know. I think my sense is we're still, that it is coming in from popular culture more, but hopefully the teachers and professors are writing it into their courses. And that's one of the reasons we're writing these books, Liza and Hidden Figures and me, is to make sure that there's lots of material available for those who do want to write those curriculum and educational materials. I know this documentary has been shown all over the country and all over the world at educational institutions and STEM events and hacker conferences and stuff like that. But that's the goal. That's the goal is and also not just women, men. I mean, the stories of Dr. John Mockley and J. Presper Eckert, and they were incredible. We should be telling these stories. Thank you.
All right, we have another one here.
Yes, thank you, because I think I overheard that your background's also in law or the like. So when the ENIAC patent was challenged Attensoft, Berry versus Unisys and all of that. Because these programmers, or this team was the first who actually programmed the machine, were they called upon to give testimony in that patent dispute about the lineage of who actually owned the computing patent for, did it in fact go to the ENIAC?
So that story has been told very well by Scott McCartney, the triumphs and tragedies of ENIAC, and he's told the story of that patent trial in the 70s. And the answer is yes. The women did do depositions. They did them mostly in Washington, D.C., and those depositions became part of the materials that I reference, particularly for Ruth Lichterman, who became Ruth Lichterman Teitelbaum, who passed away just before my project started. Her deposition, depositions are pretty staid legal documents, but still it brings a little to life who she was and what she did. It was nice to get her words. Thank you for asking.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Yes.
So, getting away from the ENIAC a little bit, my background, I've got 5 daughters. They're ranging from 22 to 1 year old. So there's a range. I have yet to be able to get any of them interested in science and technology in any shape or form. And I think it's a lot that the school systems are pushing art so much that they just have no interest in mathematics, no interest in science, no interest, and computers have just become such just a natural part of their life. There's nothing new about them. They've grown up, it's just always been there. So it's not, I know when I was a kid, and I'm sure most of the people here, computers were a new thing that was like so cool to be able to see, and it was exciting. So it seems like we've sort of taken a step backwards in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, I've never experienced anybody in work or anything that would ever have a problem with a woman coming in as a programmer or a woman doing anything. I've never seen any type of bias like that from people, but it seems to be in these girls' minds, there's a bias. Does that make sense?
And it happens right around middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they seem to think that there is something that they're not supposed to be doing this, even though I've never seen it actually in the corporate hiring world. I've never seen on an interview anybody. Does that make sense at all?
It does, because I watched it happen to my daughter. She got to middle school and said, I can't do math and computing. I'm like, right.
Right. So do you have any suggestions on that? How to overcome that sort of, I don't know what it is about it, but.
So actually, this is the cue. I'm gonna do one answer, but I'm also gonna invite our panel up, and we're gonna sit in front of the stage, because this is the kind of question that I anticipated that needs both a diversity of answers, not just from us, but from you. This is a big problem. So my son went through, I have an older son, he went through and, studied math, public school, great program, went to middle school, knew he could do technology and math, wasn't a problem. He's now in his PhD program in computer science, okay? So no problem. But my daughter went through, same teachers, same program, good at math, got to middle school and came home and said, I can't do math or computing. This is a kid who grew up with this story. She met these people, and I was like, and so if that's coming to her, that's coming to all. It was coming from the popular press, is the sense. And I remember Megan Smith, who was an advisor to this. She was VP of Google. She was AVP of Google X, the moonshot projects at Google, and then she became U.S. Chief Technology Officer under President Barack Obama. And when she was at Google X, she told the story of bringing Hollywood up to Silicon Valley and introducing them to heads of departments, so that they'd have kind of a sense when they're writing the shows, who's doing what, and so that they could kind of think about, different types of heads of departments of the different types of groups at Google. And at the end of the day, they said, Megan, everyone you introduced us to was female. And she said, can you take that back into the shows that you're producing? And that's still really not there. We're not seeing, if you watch Numbers, right, there's a female mathematician. It would help. It would help to have more cultural references who were women. That's one of the reasons I created the documentary. Role models help. The other thing that I did with my daughter was, after she told me she couldn't do computers, she wanted a new computer. I'm like, great. That's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said.
Building it yourself.
And her stepfather, who's also a member of our board of directors, Mark Massey with the ENIAC Programmers Project, helped her. And they did. And after that, I never heard any complaints, but I did hear, Mom, you're the only one who hasn't built a computer. So we're going to come down, and we're going to talk. I'd also like to introduce Professor Brian Stewart and Berger Becky.
She's on her way right now. Do you want me to put some chairs up here? How do you want to do it? Okay, whatever you like.
Do we steal the mic? Okay, we steal your mic. Thanks, Jeff. But let me ask that question to Brian and Mark. How do we change the stereotypes that are still out there?
That is definitely a tough question. One of the things that I notice a lot as a faculty member in the university is students often arrive with sort of this preconceived notion that computing is the thing that they've done all along. And very often that's centered around games. And we very often try to play into that to keep their interest up and keep them from getting turned off by having a very game-centric sort of thing. But part of the problem is the way games are constructed tends to be targeted very much at a male audience. Yeah, the first-person shooters, for example. And one of the things that I notice, for example, within our own department at Drexel, is that many of the women faculty, their focus is on a different aspect of computing, on the human-computer interaction. And that part of the story, that part of what the world of computer science is, doesn't tend to get talked about as much as the mobile apps and the games do. And so I think as a result, they tend to be a little more hidden. And that's part of the problem, is that you don't see them as obviously in the popular culture and television shows and such. So one thing that could potentially help is to expose what's going on in some of these other areas of computing that aren't games, that aren't YouTube and Twitch and all of that kind of thing.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I think there's another element that may apply for some people, and that is this: social responsibility. A lot of people, when they're younger, are very socially conscious, or they become that way, and they're like, what can we do in the world to make things better? Well, if you stop and look at it, technology has become just woven into our society. Everything about our society now is technical. I'm old enough to remember when that was a new idea. When, you know, what? I mean, I'm old enough to remember going to a cocktail party, and I walked in the room and said, what did you do? I'm a computer programmer. And the hostess would go, and honest guys, and she'd say, did you see that potted plant in the back of the room in the corner? There might be another. In other words, get that out of here, go hide. Nobody knows what you do. Nobody wants to talk to you. Just go away, right? So things have changed, to put it mildly. But the point is, for socially conscious people, which, like I said, I think they're more and more in some ways, how can you take responsibility for a society that's an utterly technical society if you don't have a pretty good understanding of tech? How can you do this? And I posit you cannot. You just cannot. Unless you understand enough about technology, you're not going to be able to do too much to impact it. And if,
How do you change the stereotype?
well, I think something you said earlier is very important, which is modeling. I think it's very important that we, if we have kids, that we, actively involve our children, particularly our females, I hate to say it, but particularly our females, because there's so many male role models already. And I think it's something where you've got to do like Kathy and I did, which was, you want a computer? Great, let's build it, right?
But, thank you. Let's hand it back to the questioner. I'd like to know what you think, and other people in the audience. How do we change the stereotype, or how have you inspired? It's not just girls. It's minorities too. How have you inspired people who feel some of it's creative guys? We need them in the graphics, right? You know, there's a whole stereotype. How do we change the stereotype?
It's horrible because, like I said, I've got 5, and the first one is going into the police force. The second one just has no interest, and I'm asking the question to you guys because I've clearly failed, you know. But you know, like, they love playing Minecraft. They want to be YouTubers. You know, they want to. They have no problem using the technology, but you know, just trying to, hey, come on, let's build a computer. You know, is even a struggle. And it's like, well, you know, I've said the same thing to my kids. It's like, if you want a new computer, you got to build it. And even then, it's like, oh, well, I don't want one that bad. And I'm just kind of like, what have I done wrong? I mean, I've got, you know, I've been programming and building computers for 30 years. Like, you know, I don't know. I mean, and the funny thing is, so I'm a data analyst by trade, and then I'm hobbyist rebuilding and restoring old computers. You know, my wife's a graphic designer, professional graphic designer, and you know, so it's not like we have this technology-free house at all. I mean, we have workstations set up for, you know, everything. I don't know.
I have a question for you. Why do you feel that they need to go into this just because that's your interest? I have 3 boys, and I'm in IT. None of my boys went into IT, and I don't feel bad about that. So why do you feel that your girls need to go into this just because that's your interest?
I don't think necessarily that they have to go into this. I'm just surprised that, you know, 3 down the line now have gone through middle school, and I'm just kind of surprised, you know, none of them have any interest whatsoever. But they all have the same aspiration to be a YouTuber. You know?
Do you want to add?
Well, I'd like to counter the question. Why do we feel that more women need to be into this field, that we have to ask the question? If they're interested in it, I feel that they're already going into it. The opportunity is there. And the same question might be, do we need more men in the fashion industry? Or something along that line. Why are we looking at it as a sex thing? Because I do work in IT, and the opportunities, at least with my company, and I'm seeing out there, are the sky's the limit anymore for women. I have more women bosses now than I've ever had in my 30-year career, and these women have come up and have taken advantage of the thing. But I still hear the question, oh, we need more girls getting into this. We need more girls getting into this.
I think the mic is being called for.
So
You need the mic.
Sorry.
Because of the remote.
Sorry, I do want to preface, this is not just about women, it's just about kids in general. Because what I'm noticing is just children in general, not just women or boys or anything, trying to get them interested in this, because it's not like it was when we were younger and this was the new exciting thing. Now the new exciting thing is YouTube. I mean, it's the social media. It's not the it's not the engineering and
science or anything has ever been the cool thing that kids want to get into. Ever. Our age, their age, whenever. That's not the thing that people want to get into per se. So.
It looks like there's.
I'll try to make it short and condense it. One thing is there should be an equal representation across, if there's no biases, there should be just as many men nurses, there should be just as many female computer programmers. My son's going to save the world. My daughter became an engineer. She won a partial scholarship to WWII in robotics. She was involved in first robotics. She was co-captain of the team, probably would have been captain, but boy-girl thing, it worked out. She went to the international finals 4 years in a row. 64 teams from the United States, 64 teams from the rest of the world. In that 4-year period from freshman through senior year, she came in 3rd place, and somewhere in the low teens on one, 21st and 26th. 4 years in a row. Of the approximate 3,500 teams that participated in that period, a total of 7 of them made it 4 years in a row. She was good. Her grandfather was an engineer, 3 degrees. I'm not a computer science, and my dad, I was, at his tails the whole way. And what I have seen is that the problem with females in these things with interest is that the peers, the boys learn at that age you go play with your Barbie dolls. You go make house. It's still there. We were at WPI for their Athena program before school began to get the girls in there, and we went through the robotics thing, and some smart-ass little 18-year-old went, "Ooh, what are the girls doing in this lab?" And I was looking for a coat hook to hang him by. And I know that the whole process, she ended up going into industrial engineering, manufacturing engineering, instead of robotics. And just that whole societal push, I think, is what backed her and other. I came from for lack of a better word, an affluent community, and there were a lot of girls on the robotics team. The whole first thing makes robotics cool. It makes it like being a varsity sport. The second state championship our high school ever won. One was chess, and then the robotics team 4 years in a row. And so is there this something educational, whatever, where we can get the non people of color and women to be more accepted at that level? Because if it's accepted at that level, this push against it wouldn't be there.
This push against it wouldn't be there. Thank you. So we've got some more comments going through, so I'm going to go down here and then go back there. To Jeff or AV, do we still need this light over here? And can we turn it off? Good, good, good. Thanks.
Yeah, so I just also want to comment. I have accidentally gotten two women into programming because we were doing kind of a knowledge exchange among friends. So one guy was teaching drawing, one was teaching Mandarin. I did not pick that up. And then I was kind of teaching programming, but not as this is your career, just I'd teach it the same way you would take up, say, knitting or woodworking, where it's just, hey, this is a fun thing to do. Hey, look, you can make a RPN calculator. And one of them went, well, screw this English teaching stuff. I'm going to go be a programmer. This is so much more fun.
And you can make so much more money.
Yeah, but I think that some of this is just that they get discouraged by pushed out of the kind of career path or the interest before they even know what it is. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly mention that I had an ex-girlfriend who, came over to my house, and she was enamored by the electronics setup I had on my bench and everything. She's like, wow. She says, when I was a little girl, I was with my parents in Radio Shack, and I wanted one of the electronics kits. I was so enamored by it. It looked so cool. And when I asked my father for the electronics kit, he said, oh, sweetheart, soldering irons aren't for little girls.
And one thing I want to say is I'm bringing the mic around. I should get away from that. is my father was an electrical engineer and then became an MBA, DBA, and talked about technologies. He interviewed the founders of Intel for his dissertation. So I come by these oral histories, through the dinner table. But one of the things that I found is that, because we did 2 other short documentaries, one called The Coders, about women who are very involved with Java. In fact, a woman who created the Java servlet, and the woman who led the team that created Flash. So one of the things we're finding is that most of the women in tech, at least of my age, had a parent, male or female, who opened the door for them. So that's one of the things. And the other thing is, let's go back to the money. When I went to college, my mother said, study anything you want. But computing, that I'd been playing around. I started programming at Western Electric before there was STEM. They let us go in and play on PDP 1145s in the afternoon. That was a while ago. And so the object of fun, I learned it was fun. We were just playing games on these machines and writing games, and money. There's, there were jobs. I came out and there were jobs in computing. Wall Street wanted people in IT. So opening up the possibility, breaking the stereotype, and we know that there are lots and lots of jobs here. So why do we want women in computing and minorities? For the same reason we want men, because there are going to be a lot of millions and millions of open jobs.
It's interesting. I think that there's definitely a need to, encourage more, women and minorities to enter the field. But I think there's another factor at work as well, which is that the maturing nature of the field, has sort of changed it. If you look back at early radio, when radio first came out, and you were a radio hobbyist, and you built all your own stuff, people were building their own radios to listen and to transmit, et cetera. And then, it matured, and it became a consumer technology that people used rather than played with. And I think, computing has sort of, gone in that direction. I think we're a little bit biased here because we all started, in this industry when you had to build your own stuff, and you had to be much more knowledgeable if you wanted to use the technology. Now you don't have to be, and I think that's sort of the difference between I want to be, a computer person versus I want to be a YouTuber. I want to be a YouTuber because I want to use this technology in some way to achieve another goal. Whereas I think most of the people in this room, we got into it, because it's cool and it's, it was new. So I think, as any technology matures, you're going to get, it's going to become more of a consumer end user thing, and I think that plays into this as well. But I do believe that there is a need, to, when I go into my office and I sit in meetings with, the development staff, it is overwhelmingly male. It is, overwhelmingly people who look like me. And, that is I think a problem, and I think it needs to be fixed. But I think we also have to bring in that other piece of it, is just that the industry is maturing.
A couple of comments piggybacking on what Professor Stewart had started saying. I know for a fact that all of us in this room and everybody listening online has used a terrible UI app at some point. We need more people who are not the cookie cutter, what we think of as a programmer, designing the UIs for these apps, because particularly I'm not in IT. I have a doctorate in osteopathic medicine. I'm board certified in emergency medicine, and I also own a trucking company. But I grew up learning to read and write by programming COBOL. That's how my mother taught me to read and write.
When I first met him, he told me his first language was COBOL.
Yeah.
Not English, COBOL.
So the thing is, in our society today, truly, a bad UI can kill somebody. I have seen EHRs that are so terrible that they, on a daily basis, endanger the lives of the patients that we are trying to treat. And that needs to be fixed. It is truly a critical and potentially life-threatening problem, and we need people to address this.
I will say, I think a lot of times you can get kind of stuck with this idea that there has to be a specific culture for the kind of work. I mean, me and my coworkers, we can sit around and chat about keyboards or other hobbyist tech stuff all day, but the industry has grown so much larger than kind of just having interest from, more old-fashioned kind of hobbyist type of stuff. And we need to kind of be more open to having, a larger culture that isn't just so stuck in this, not to say it isn't fun to talk about, but, more open to people that aren't, that don't live and breathe computers, go do it as a work and not to, So it's, and, kind of mentioning is, it's hard to get into something when you're the only one in the room that's, as the individual. It's some people thrive in it, some people don't, but I don't think we should kind of expect people to thrive in that scenario. We should allow people to have, different cultures than just kind of what the dominating culture is for why people get interested in that is kind of, what I'd say. Thank you.
Just since everybody's talking about the daughters, my daughter had terrible math teachers in high school, and she did not become a mathematician. She became a lawyer because she's an excellent writer. She's a public defender. But one thing that I realized when she was trying to teach us some math, what you need is better ways of teaching. The teaching of math that's happened, and science as well, it's terrible. It's like what you want to do is tell stories. Like I told her some stories about some Greek mathematicians and then told her some stuff that goes with it. And she loved that, and she retained that. And I think in general, I think a lot of the science and that we teach is terrible. It's like the way it's taught. Like that's why I love these kinds of documentaries, because I love to hear these stories.
And we've been joined by Burger Becky. So let me first, it's nice to meet you. Would you like to comment on the topic, which is kind of changing the stereotypes? And everybody's been kind of joining in the conversation. And the question that was raised, do we need to? Does it matter? Which I think is a very fair question, if that's a fair paraphrasing. Also a fair question. So.
Now, when you say changing the stereotypes, is what, as in the context of now or context of back then?
Good question. We were talking about even today, if I might paraphrase and tell me if, people with 4 daughters, we still all get to a number of girls get to middle school and somehow decide they can't do technology. There seem to be some stereotypes still out there that change how they feel about themselves and about how they feel in the field. And are there ways to counter that? And we've been talking about that a little bit.
Well, the main issue is that still there's a lot of people who hold these what they call conservative values, in which men are to be the breadwinners and the women are supposed to be the stay-at-home moms. And unfortunately, there are many still areas, even in this country, in which that mindset is not overtly brought out, but it's subtly brought out, so that therefore when women are in middle school, they're tended to go to home, and they're encouraged to go to like home economics classes or cooking classes and stuff, whereas the men are more, or the boys are tended to encourage to go to, let's say, math, academics, and so forth, because of the unconscious bias that's out there. Now, a lot of schools, especially like the ones I came from in California, they've eliminated all that. They just simply say, you need electives, you pick. And therefore, a lot of boys are in the home ec class because they want to be chefs. And women are in the tech classes because they want to be mathematicians or possibly airline pilots. It doesn't matter, because there is no difference between men and women when it comes to academics. It's just simply the peer pressure to go to a certain line of academics for both genders due to just the unconscious bias based on these old values.
And could you pass it down? If you guys want to comment?
I can always.
I think I'm pretty much said all I have.
Terrific. The other thing I'll add, and then I'll bring the microphone over here, is that when I meet with my friends in Silicon Valley who are working on, very senior in some of the tech companies, they want to hire more women and minorities. As you know, I do internet law, and they're developing global systems, and they think that their teams are better with diversity on them, diversity of language, diversity of cultures, diversity of nationalities, diversity of backgrounds, gender, race. They seem to think it creates much, and the reason we know that is they're investing enormous amounts of money in the pipeline to bring a more diverse group into the educational system in college to help them graduate and then to bring them into jobs and recruiting. So I've urged them to look at attrition also, because at one point, it was a few years ago, it may have gone down, but once you even got women into the tech fields and into tech careers, there was a 56% attrition rate. They were dropping out quickly because it was difficult then to, whatever they were doing with their jobs didn't seem to work with their companies. So when I've gone around the world talking with some of the tech companies, that's one of the things they're working on now is retention. So let me go to the back, and hold on a second. There was somebody who was in the back who was looking. Thanks.
Okay, there's a tendency among programmers to establish a pecking order. Essentially, I think Mark Twain once said, "Never argue with an idiot because he will drag you down to his level and beat you with experience." And programmers have a tendency to drag every discussion into some obscure area of hardware or technology that only they understand, even if it's like a 40-year-old, register or whatever, some instruction opcode from an old processor, and just basically tell you, I know something you don't know, and therefore, you can't tell me what to do. And I think if women get exposed to that a few too many times, they just turn off. And I've met women in the hardware industry, a lot of them from South Asia, who have such incredible insight into processor architectures, and they're so humble about it. They don't even, some men would just take that knowledge and just kind of, lord it over you, and yet they just do it so humbly, and it's shocking. And so that's one of the things we have to deal with. I mean, I think we just need a culture where I guess that toxic element is just removed.
For everyone. I think that would attract a lot of people, a diversity. Thank you. And I think you wanted the microphone. Sorry. Let me do a quick time check with Jeff.
We're still good. We can keep going.
How long do we have? Would you like us to go?
We can have another 30 minutes if you want.
Another 30 minutes. How about another 10 or 15?
Yeah, we can
Okay,
go another 15.
cool.
That's better.
Thank you so much. I just wanted us all, as we keep talking about this, to affirm that we are a group of almost exclusively white men, and then in the audience it has only been us who have said anything, and that keeping that in mind, as we talk about unconscious bias, education, etc., we also need to affirm that the tech industry in particular is rife with scandals of harassment against women and not white men. And I mean, every year and every month something comes up. So considering that many of us work in positions where we perhaps manage other people in tech positions, people who may not be white, who may not be men, there is a large responsibility we have being in those institutions. While the institutions may have nominal desires to diversify their hiring and attrition, it is ultimately us who work in those environments to ensure that people working with us feel safe and feel comfortable. And ultimately, I think we can make a difference, but we do have to affirm that again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I'll just say, as a lawyer, don't let anybody harass anybody, okay? Whatever the job is.
Thank you. I haven't said this yet. I have been in IT and programming and software for 45 years, and it continues to grow. And part of what I've seen has been, and this might piss some of you off, is that I have found women software developers to be excellent. Almost every single one. They seem, frankly, to listen a little better than men do. And I'm just, telling you God's honest truth here. Always when I interview people, always when I'm hiring, number one skill I'm looking for is not their technical prowess. Are they going to freaking be able to listen? And are they going to understand when I tell them something needs to be done? Are they going to understand? Are they going to understand what it's like to work on a team? I don't want to really take this any further, but I'm just pointing out that their diversity in software development, like the doctor said, the ability to internalize what the system is supposed to do, why we're coding this, what's the value proposition to the world as a whole, is really important.
And I'll pass it in a second. And as we go into AI machine learning, and at least a $56 trillion industry is going to be created, if not more, I think we need everyone. If we're going to have these systems, these decision-making systems replace humans, we probably need a lot of people involved in that process so we don't kill people, as you said, and so we don't do hiring decisions that mistakenly have the unconscious and conscious biases of the past. I'm seeing bail systems that don't know the bail laws, parole systems that don't know the parole laws. So the more people we involve, and not just in tech, we need to involve a much wider, ethicists and lawyers and, people who understand these systems, who understand the underlying system that will be now replaced by AI machine learning. It just seems like there's a plethora of jobs opening up, and the more people we interest and the more diverse they are, the better the systems are for the people we're creating them for.
This is kind of a half-formed thought, so I'm not sure how far I'm going to get with this, but I think when you pointed out that you see women programmers who just seem to all be top-notch, what comes to mind to me is that maybe that's the confidence level that they feel like they need to be at before they even try. Like when you have an environment that is an in-group, as we've talked about before in this room, like to break into that in-group, to join people who are not like you, to be the only odd one out in an office, you have to be at such a confidence level. And that's, I think, it's a question of how we bootstrap it, but as we're trying to bootstrap it, we have to go out of our way to look out to the crowd and say come over here, we want to be welcoming, we want to talk to people. And it's more than just at the recruiting level. No one wants to work at an office where they feel like the odd one out, where there's a culture where they don't feel appreciated. So it's more than just that. It's we can't solve it just with recruiting, just with money. No one wants their job to be that situation.
No one wants to be a token. Thank you. Yeah, no one wants to be a token. Everyone wants to be a member of the team. So any other topics we should be discussing? This one went on for a long time. Thank you so much for introducing it. And Jeff.
So you're talking about what might be a better way to allow girls to feel more comfortable in a certain culture to go into technical careers, whether they want to or not, but at least have the space to feel comfortable. Do you think that private schools would be a good space for that? Because then I've heard different situations where they feel comfortable in those types of situations.
Let me take it one step further. Private schools or all girls schools? Is that what you're? Yes. All girls school. That's really interesting. And anybody who wants to talk about this as well, a number of my friends did go to Wellesley, Mount Holyoke, Smith, the women's schools, and they loved it. They did not have to compete in science and tech. They competed with each other, but it was a different group. Some of us went straight through the public school system and went into co-ed institutions and, did do co-ed. And when I went into my upper level computer science courses, I did look around and sit next to Susan, who was the only woman in the room of the 60 people taking the C course. It was okay. I had great teachers. I had great friends. It was a great community, but there are other people, as you noticed, who, as has been mentioned, who would leave the room. So I think having the diversity of options is a really good one, so that there are all women's programs, maybe, all men's programs, and also the co-ed programs. Why not? Let me give it back to you.
So some of it, I think, is culture. Do you see a difference in different countries about the culture of how they would view girls who would be in coding type of careers?
And I'm going to bring the microphone back over here and we'll pass it down. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, other countries have really gotten over this unconscious bias and issue. India has lots and lots of women in computer science and IT. Not as much in engineering, but they're working on it, I understand. Oh, the Middle East. I'm meeting women engineers and really they're working hard. I mean, they've opened up the educational opportunities for those who have access to the educational opportunities to a wider group. Let me pass it to you. What are you seeing around the world?
Yeah. Well, around the world, there are still areas which they have, like, especially like in Afghanistan and so forth, where they're just subjugating women and so forth. But the one topic I wanted to bring up was it was brought up earlier in a question about hiring. One of the biggest problems we have is because of all the unconscious bias that people have had about men and women and so forth. They put it in their software. An example is such as the story of Bianca White, which is a African-American woman who, that is not her name, but she tried to get a job, so she submitted a resume, got nothing. Sent a resume for hundreds of companies, nothing. All she did was change the name on the resume to Bianca White. That was it. Sent that same resume out, and within 3 days, she had 100 different recruiters reaching out to her. And the reason what was going on was that software was being used to filter out to prospective candidates and so forth, and when it found a name it didn't really understand and so forth, it just tossed it out. Didn't even look at the qualifications. Same goes with many other recruiters who look at the resumes and they see a name and they say, oh, female, toss it. Or the software looks for certain qualifications inside of the resume and tosses it, because you don't know, you have to figure out how the algorithm works in order for you to actually even get your foot in the door. And this is another problem about that unconscious bias. The software needs to be rewritten, redone, so that it only looks at, let's say, the qualifications and not other, oh, has this person participated in the sports or some other, esoteric qualifications that unfortunately will tend to only favor male resumes to be able to be brought in front of the recruiters. Because numerous people I've talked to in the recruiting field have always said, I just can't find women to hire. And I say, well, where do you get your resumes? From this filtering software. And I go, turn off that software. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I didn't know there was this many women out there. So it's like, because the filter is filtering them all out. And therein is a problem.
I'd like to follow up on something that was mentioned about confidence. This is something I see in the classroom very, very frequently. And honestly, I think a lot of it comes from the early educational experience. Students go through their primary and secondary schools coming out with this belief that it's bad to fail, that to make a mistake is wrong. And the number of students that I see who won't try until they feel confident enough that they will succeed inhibits so many. The reality is everybody, regardless of demographic, needs to understand that trying and failing is the most important step. If you succeed the first time, you haven't learned anything. You only learn when you fail. And that's the fundamental objective in all of what we do.
Thank you, Brian. We were, we were earlier talking about things you can do as a parent. That lesson alone is extremely powerful. Who Who here, when they became a programmer, did not constantly get hit in the face by error messages enough to drive anybody crazy, right? I sure did. And I mean, there's some people who are really sensitive to being made wrong. I don't have anything else worthwhile to say, so I'm going to give it back. But.
One more comment, and then I'll do a closing comment because we're at 11:30, and we appreciate so much your time.
The importance of culture, I think, is greatly underestimated, both internationally, as Jeff was getting into comparing, or actually you were comparing India, for example, where it's actually getting close to half female in some of these STEM fields. But also here, subculture. I mean, how many of us did what we did in the end in computing because there were friends that we had, or teachers that we had that we had some bond with, and it made it fun for us. It made it real for us that we could see that as a path. And many other explanations have been attempted because they're not without any evidence, right? There is a problem with stereotypes. There is a problem with active malice in some cases, or harassment, right? It exists, but it's not the primary explanation, at least not today, for what this huge gap is. And let's admit that the gap is enormous, right? It's not, and the higher up the higher up you go, and I don't mean leadership-wise, because women have made a lot of progress in leadership in IT. But in terms of the hardcore engineering, the higher up you go, the less diverse we are. And it's not because primarily because we don't like people that aren't like us, right? It's not, we're a more liberal than average bunch, right? I mean, that's a fair thing to say with IT largely being driven in Silicon Valley and Boston historically and stuff like that. But the power of the culture that we came from and unconscious bias and so on is so great. And it's hard to measure, right? And there was a wonderful study a few years ago that noticed internationally that when the choice is actually greater of careers, it doesn't cause more women to go into engineering. So in societies like Iceland or other parts of Scandinavia, there aren't more women engineers than in Germany or the United States, something like that, or countries that are not quite as developed. And it's strange, right? And so India is essentially the peak because of the fusion of two things. One is economic. It pays well to go into these fields. And the other is that the bias against it has finally, in most cases, decreased. So sorry for rambling on a long time, but yeah, culture is super important. It's just not an easy thing to analyze or to change. Oh.
Great. This is exactly the conversation that I was hoping the documentary would create. And to have it with you, and we can continue it afterwards, to have it with you, with people who have done so much in the community, who have done so much in the field, and are also, I know because I've now talked to people in the exhibit halls and other places, doing so much in the community to share and inspire and grow the next generation. Thank you. Thank you for talking with us, giving us more background on this. Please share the story of the ENIAC programmers. There's more at eniacprogrammers.org, and you can go to a link to see the film, set up screenings, things like that. But certainly for me, one of the things was role models, finding out that I had role models, and you should know that some of the women passed away earlier than later. So Jean Jennings Bardick, the one who told you ENIAC was a son of a bitch to program. When we were founding ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers to manage the internet, I mean, you guys probably know, the internet identifiers, the domain name system, the IP addressing system, and protocols. I would call her And I would tell her about some of the headaches I was having as we were trying to form this organization and figure out its scope and what would do and who would be part of it. And I'm like, if you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't have these headaches. And she would just laugh, one of those great big laughs. So, these women loved what they did. I wanted to show you how much they lit up when they talked about it, as you light up when you talk about it. If you share that with women and men, girls and boys, they will learn to light up when they talk about this too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy. That was a really great talk. I really appreciate you coming here. At first, I wasn't sure if you were going to come. You'd asked me, how many people are there? 100. And I said, how many do you usually have at talks? Thousands? Okay. I was like, she's never going to come here. And a few days later, she said, yeah, I'm going to come. So I appreciate that. Mark talking to you. All right. Thank you, everyone.